All right, let's get right into it. You know, a State of the Union address is always a huge deal, but sometimes the reaction is even more telling than the speech itself. So in this explainer, we're going to break down commentator Glenn Beck's take on a recent address. We'll start with what he saw as the political theater in the room, and then we'll get into his analysis of the speech's biggest claims.
And this quote from Beck really kicks things off. He opens his reaction with just this sense of complete shock. And it wasn't just about the words in the speech, but the whole atmosphere, the behavior he was watching. It's this feeling of, wow, this is something new, that really frames his entire take.
So first up, let's talk about what Beck called the political theater. For him, the way people in the chamber were acting was a story all on its own, maybe even before you get to a single word of the speech.
Beck really zooms in on this one specific moment. The president asks everyone in the room to stand if they agree that the government's #1 job is to protect its own citizens. And Beck points out, you see Republicans get to their feet, but the Democratic members, they stay seated. No applause.
And that was Beck's instant reaction. He saw that moment, the decision not to stand, as just this colossal political blunder. To him, it sent a signal about a massive divide on what should be a really basic idea. He just found the visual of it absolutely stunning.
But it wasn't just that one moment. Beck paints a picture of this totally chaotic environment. He says the president wasn't just speaking loudly for dramatic flair, he literally had to shout to be heard over members of Congress who were yelling back at him. The word he used for the whole scene was insane.
And this slide really puts that shift Beck's talking about into perspective. He brings up 2009, when a single congressman shouting "you lie" became this huge national scandal. It was shocking. But now, he's basically saying that widespread shouting is just what happens. It's the new norm. That's a massive change.
Beck also zeroed in on the president's claim that Democrats had cut off funding for the Department of Homeland Security. But the real kicker for him was what wasn't said. That DHS funding is also what pays for the Secret Service. And with all the recent threats against the president, Beck felt that leaving that little detail out was a pretty big deal.
Okay, so that's the theater. Let's shift gears and talk about the substance. For the next part of his analysis, Beck digs into the president's key claims and compares them to what the fact-checkers were saying.
So let's start with the economy. You can see this pattern Beck identifies right away. The president says inflation is plummeting. The fact-checkers give a different, specific number, but yeah, they agree the trend is downward. The president talks about low gas prices. Fact-checkers point out the national average is higher, but Beck's take is, hey, it's sure as hell better than $4. It's all about the general direction versus the exact nitty-gritty detail.
Now this was a big one, an absolutely massive figure from the speech. The president claimed he had secured commitments for over $18 trillion in new investments. I mean, that's a number that's guaranteed to get a ton of attention. And of course, that attention led to this verdict, unverifiable. The fact-checkers just couldn't find any independent proof for that specific number. Beck points this out, but then he turns it around and asks the fact-checkers a question. Okay, if it's not 18 trillion, then what is the number? He basically argues that if you can't offer a different figure, it's hard to just throw the whole claim out.
Okay, next up, jobs, wealth, and regulations. According to Beck, this is an area where the president's speech actually had some of its strongest and most easily proven points.
And here you can see several claims that got a straight-up true rating. Things like record-high natural gas production and more people working than ever before. But the one Beck really highlights is that 100% of new jobs were created in the private sector. He argues that's a huge sign of a healthy economy, because it's not just government jobs growing.
This is a perfect example of the kind of nuance Beck was digging into. So, the president says the typical 401k is up by 30 grand. Another source says the number is closer to 23 grand. For Beck, arguing over the exact number completely misses the point. Whether it's 23 or 30, a gain like that in a single year is, as he puts it, a big deal for American families. Let's look at another number that got a lot of focus, 2.4 million. This was the president's figure for how many Americans had been lifted off of food stamps, and it was presented as a sign that people were becoming more prosperous and less dependent on the government. But this claim got slapped with an exaggerated label. According to Beck's source, the number of people on food stamps did go down, but they just couldn't independently confirm that 2.4 million was the biggest single-year drop ever recorded. So it got that shaky rating.
All right, let's move on to the last big bucket of claims, and this one covers crime and a really explosive allegation about government fraud.
So when it comes to crime, the data presented was mostly good news. The claim about cutting the flow of fentanyl by a record amount, rated true. The historic drop in the murder rate, mostly true, with a huge 21% drop in major cities. The claim about DC crime, though, was called an exaggeration. Homicides were way down, sure, but it wasn't quite almost no crime.
Okay, now we get to what might have been the single most jaw-dropping claim of the entire night. The president made an allegation of a staggering $19 billion in fraud, which he connected to members of the Somali community and government feeding programs.
And you can see the massive difference right here. The president says $19 billion. The press fact-check comes back with hundreds of millions. Now, they confirmed fraud was happening, but the scale is just completely different. Beck, for his part, says he's deeply skeptical of the press's number, suggesting that the president's bigger figure might be closer to the truth, given how much money the government spends.
And this quote really gets to the heart of why Beck thinks this is so important. He says he agrees with the president's idea here, that if you could just get rid of government fraud, you could potentially wipe out the entire national deficit. It just shows you the scale of the problem as he sees it. And this is where everything kind of comes full circle, right back to that political theater we started with. Beck points out that when the president announced that huge drop in the murder rate and other good news on crime, once again, the Democratic side of the room didn't clap. For him, it was just another one of those moments that said everything about how divided things are.
So, after all the theater, all the numbers, all the fact checks, what are we supposed to make of all this? Beck's analysis really seems to boil down to one central, nagging problem.
And that's really the question we're left with, isn't it? When our whole political conversation is about arguing over whether something is exaggerated or mostly true, how are you, the person watching at home, supposed to figure out what the actual truth is? Beck's analysis suggests that these days, even the facts have become part of the show, leaving it up to all of us to try and piece together what's real.